A brave young officer, ready to protect and serve, faces his biggest challenge yet. A dog, feared by everyone, chained and abandoned, labeled dangerous, ignored by all. But what happens when one man decides to stand up and show kindness? A German shepherd, broken by betrayal, is about to learn what it means to trust again. What happened next will leave you speechless and restore your faith in the power of second chances. Before we dive in, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure to click the notification bell so you never miss a story that touches your heart. The small town of Pine Ridge, nestled in the heart of the American West, had a charm all its own. Rolling hills surrounded the town, with the vast sky stretching above like a canvas. The dusty roads and the rustic buildings gave the place a timeless feel, and the occasional wind stirred the leaves of the large oak trees that lined the streets. It wasn't a place of excitement or rapid change, but rather one of quiet simplicity, where everyone knew everyone else and secrets were hard to keep. The townspeople moved through their days in a comfortable routine, not expecting anything extraordinary to ever interrupt their peace. But that was about to change. Jake Matthews was still getting used to the quiet life of Pine Ridge. At 25, he had joined the police force with hopes of making a difference, eager to serve the community with the same dedication and care his late mother had always shown him. His mother, a kind-hearted nurse who had passed away when he was just a boy, had instilled in him the values of empathy and service. With a strong build and short-cropped brown hair, Jake was a figure that commanded attention. His deep blue eyes, often filled with thoughtfulness, reflected the quiet strength he carried with him. His youthful face held traces of sorrow, as if the loss of his mother had shaped him into someone with a sense of quiet resilience, always trying to prove himself, especially to those who didn't understand the pain of growing up without a parent. He had a gentle demeanor, one that contrasted with his imposing frame, making him approachable yet strong. That morning, the sun was still rising, casting a warm golden glow over Pine Ridge. Jake had been assigned to a routine animal control check for the day, a task he didn't mind but didn't find exciting either. He was mostly focused on ensuring that animals in the area were well cared for, that no one had abandoned pets or allowed them to roam unsupervised. It was a peaceful duty, but as he cruised down the narrow streets in his patrol car, something caught his eye. A small, weathered house on the outskirts of town stood with a large, rusted chain-link fence around it. In the backyard, something moved. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he noticed a large figure struggling against its chains. Slowing the car to a stop, he squinted through the windshield, his curiosity piqued. The dog was massive, with a sleek coat of black and tan fur, a German shepherd. It was the kind of dog Jake knew well, loyal, courageous, but strong-willed. However, this one was not moving with the confidence Jake had seen in other K9s. The dog's posture was tense, and the way it paced in circles at the end of its chain told Jake that it was agitated, maybe even frightened. It was clear that the dog had been left to its own devices for too long. Jake got out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he approached the rusty gate. He could feel the tension in the air as the dog's ears pricked up at the sound of his footsteps. The German shepherd's eyes locked onto him, and for a brief moment, Jake felt a flash of fear. The dog's eyes were wild, its muscles taut under its fur, and its teeth bared in a growl that sent a chill down his spine. This was a dog that had been abandoned, probably mistreated, and now it was acting out of fear. It reminded Jake of how, as a young boy, he had acted out his own pain and confusion after losing his mother. He understood that this dog wasn't just dangerous, it was broken, and more than anything it needed someone to help it. Jake took a cautious step forward, his voice steady but low. "Hey there, boy. It's okay," he said gently, as though speaking to a frightened child. The dog growled again, but Jake didn't flinch. He could feel the dog's unease, and it mirrored the way he had felt after his mother's death, alone, misunderstood, and angry. But Jake wasn't like the others who had turned their backs on the dog. He wasn't going to walk away. As he reached the chain-link fence, Jake could see the dog's eyes soften, just slightly. It was as if the dog was trying to decide whether to trust him or not. Jake knew he needed to show this dog that not everyone was like the ones who had abandoned it. With slow movements, he knelt down, showing the dog he meant no harm. His heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his voice calm, hoping to bridge the gap between him and the animal. "You're not alone," Jake murmured, though he wasn't sure if the dog understood. But in that moment, the connection between them was real, even if unspoken. The dog stopped growling and simply watched him, its eyes filled with a quiet, sad recognition. Jake's heart went out to it. It wasn't the dog's fault that it had been abandoned. And for the first time in a long while, Jake felt a sense of purpose, something more than just his regular patrol duty. This dog needed help, and he was the one who was going to offer it. Before he could move any closer, a voice broke through the quiet morning air. "You might want to stay back from him, officer," called an older man who had appeared from a nearby porch. He was wearing a worn-out hat and a plaid shirt, his wrinkled face showing years of experience. "That dog's not safe. He's been like that ever since his owner disappeared. He attacks anyone who gets close." Jake looked over at the man, trying to gauge the truth in his words. The man's expression was grim, and he clearly didn't think much of the dog. But Jake wasn't swayed. He could see the fear in the man's eyes, not just for the dog, but for something deeper. It wasn't just the dog that needed help, it was the whole town, including the man who feared it. "I'm not here to hurt him," Jake said firmly, standing tall. "I just want to help." The old man grunted, turning back to his house, but Jake didn't take his eyes off the dog. Slowly, he reached into his pocket for his phone and began dialing animal control. He knew that this wasn't just a routine check anymore. This was something that needed attention, and it wasn't just about the law. It was about compassion. As the call went through, Jake kept his gaze fixed on the dog. Bruno, as he would later find out, had once been a police dog, a K-9 officer just like Jake. But the years of neglect had turned him into something the town now feared. Jake wondered what had happened to Bruno's previous owner, and why the dog had been left to rot in that cage. But for now, all he could do was offer his presence, hoping that it would be enough to start the healing process. The day would come when Jake would understand the full extent of what had happened to Bruno, but for now, it was enough that he had made the first step. He had shown up, and he was ready to face what came next. The sun had begun to rise again over Pine Ridge, casting a soft, golden hue on the quiet streets. Jake Matthews was back in his patrol car, making his way to the small rusted house on the edge of town. He had made a habit of visiting the German Shepherd, Bruno, every morning. Jake had seen the dog's fierce reactions, the way it snarled and lunged when anyone approached the fence. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Bruno than just aggression. There was pain in the dog's eyes, a deep, unspoken sorrow that Jake could sense. Maybe, just maybe, he could help heal it. This morning was no different from the others. Jake parked his car at the end of the driveway and stepped out onto the gravel, his boots crunching with each step. Bruno immediately noticed the movement, its ears perked up, its head snapping toward Jake as if it could sense the man's every intention. The growl came quickly, a low rumble in the dog's chest. Jake stopped, taking a breath and giving the dog space. He wasn't afraid, not of Bruno, not of what the dog might do. But he knew this was a delicate situation. Aggression was often a defense mechanism, and Jake had learned from a young age that when someone was hurting, the best thing to do was to approach with kindness, not force. "Easy there, buddy," Jake called out, his voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you." He took a few more slow steps forward, careful not to make any sudden movements that might startle the dog further. The sound of Bruno's barking echoed in the empty yard, but Jake noticed that this time it wasn't as harsh. The growls were still there, but there was a certain hesitation in Bruno's body language. It was as if the dog was torn between his fear and a flicker of curiosity. Jake crouched down a little, making himself seem smaller, less threatening. He didn't try to get closer right away. He simply stood there, waiting, letting the dog decide if it was willing to trust him even for a second. And then, as if on cue, something changed in Bruno's eyes. The growls faded to a low whine, and for the first time, Jake saw the dog's body relax just a bit. It was a tiny victory, but it was something. Bruno was starting to understand that not all humans were a threat. For the next few days, Jake continued his visits. Each time he took small steps forward. Sometimes he would sit on the ground a few feet away, never getting too close but always present. He brought treats and placed them just out of Bruno's reach, allowing the dog to make the choice to trust him enough to take them. It was slow progress, but Jake could feel the bond forming. He wasn't trying to force Bruno to love him. He was simply showing the dog that not everyone would hurt him. That, in time, trust could be rebuilt. It was on one of these mornings, as Jake sat on the ground near the fence, that he heard footsteps approaching. He turned and saw a familiar face. A woman was walking down the dirt road toward him. Her blonde hair was tied up in a messy bun, and she wore a loose cardigan over a pair of jeans. She looked like someone who had just come back to town after a long absence. As she got closer, Jake recognized her. Sarah Collins. She had been his best friend when they were kids, but she'd moved away after high school. Now she was back. "Jake?" Sarah's voice was soft, but there was a hint of surprise in it. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you'd be out patrolling the streets, not sitting with the dog everyone's scared of." Jake stood up and smiled. Sarah had always been a little more carefree, the type to speak her mind without hesitation. "I'm trying to get through to him," Jake said, nodding toward Bruno. "I think he's been through a lot, and he just needs someone to show him that he's not a threat." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical but intrigued. "You're talking about the German Shepherd, right? The one who's been chained up for months. I've heard stories about him. People say he's dangerous." Jake didn't deny it. "I know. But I don't think he's inherently dangerous. I think he's just been hurt. And hurt animals. They lash out because they're afraid." He paused, his gaze returning to the dog, who was watching them from the other side of the fence, its eyes still wary but not as hostile as before. Sarah nodded thoughtfully, her blue eyes scanning the dog. "You're right. I've seen a lot of animals like that when I worked at the shelter. They're not bad, they just need someone to understand them. It takes time, though." Jake smiled, grateful for Sarah's understanding. "I figured you'd get it. I've been thinking about getting him out of that yard. Maybe seeing the world again will help him." Sarah crossed her arms, her fingers absent-mindedly twirling a strand of hair as she considered this. "You know, I've been working at the pet store across town. We get a lot of dogs in need of homes, but if you're serious about helping this one, maybe we could work together. I can give you some pointers on how to handle him." Jake looked at Sarah, appreciating her offer. She had always been the practical one, the one who knew how to take action when others hesitated. "I'd appreciate that. I think he's starting to trust me, but I'm not sure how to handle the more intense moments yet." Sarah smiled and nodded. "You just need to take it slow. Let him come to you. Don't rush anything. And if he's scared, give him space. The last thing you want to do is push him too far too fast." The sound of Bruno's bark interrupted their conversation. The dog had been watching them closely, but now it began pacing again, its body stiff. Jake and Sarah both turned to look at him. Sarah raised her hand slowly toward the dog, but Jake put his hand gently on her arm. "Not yet," Jake said quietly. "He's still deciding." They stood there for a few moments in silence, watching as Bruno's pacing slowed and his gaze softened. For the first time, it seemed like the dog was watching them with less suspicion. Sarah's words echoed in Jake's mind. "Take it slow. Let him come to you." That was exactly what he was doing. Slowly, over time, the walls around Bruno's heart would come down. Jake just had to be patient and let the dog make the first move. As Sarah turned to leave, she smiled at Jake. "Let me know if you need any more advice. I've got a lot of experience with this stuff." Jake nodded gratefully. "I will." "Thanks, Sarah." With that, Sarah walked back down the road, leaving Jake alone with Bruno once again. The quiet of the morning settled over the town, and Jake knew that despite the challenges ahead, this was just the beginning of something important. For both him and the dog, the storm had come without warning. The sky darkened, heavy clouds clashing against the distant mountains, their rumblings shaking the stillness of the night. Jake Matthews was back at the same spot in the yard, sitting cross-legged a few feet away from Bruno's cage. The rain poured in sheets, drenching the ground and creating a rhythm on the earth that seemed to mirror the tension in the air. The wind howled through the trees, the branches creaking as if protesting against the storm. The town of Pine Ridge was silent, save for the storm and the occasional bark from Bruno, who had been restless all day. Jake had been spending more time with Bruno, trying to reach him in ways no one else had. Each day he ventured a little closer, each day watching the dog's reactions, studying his every move. Bruno had stopped growling at him, but there were still moments of tension, moments when the dog would snap or jerk away as if expecting to be hurt. Jake could see the fear, the pain in Bruno's eyes. He knew the dog's aggression wasn't just an inherent part of him, it was a shield, built from years of suffering. But Jake was determined to break that shield. Tonight, as the storm intensified, something felt different. Jake could sense the shift before he saw it. Bruno's barking had slowed to a low whine, and Jake felt his heart tighten. He looked at the dog through the bars of the fence, watching its eyes closely. The rain pelted the ground, but Bruno's gaze was far away, lost in a place Jake couldn't reach. It was as if the dog wasn't even aware of him anymore, consumed by some distant memory. Jake leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the dog's face. Then he heard it, a deep, sorrowful sigh from Bruno. It was the kind of sound someone makes when they're trying to hold in their pain but can't. Jake's pulse quickened. This wasn't the usual restlessness. This wasn't just a frightened dog trying to ward off danger. This was a dog remembering something. Something terrible. "Bruno," Jake whispered, his voice soft but firm. "What happened to you?" But the dog didn't respond, its body still and its eyes empty. Jake had seen this before, the same faraway look in the eyes of people who had experienced trauma. His mother had gone through it before she passed away, lost in the grief of losing her husband and fighting for her life. The memory of that pain seemed to echo in Jake's own chest. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps interrupted the silence. Jake turned his head, his attention snapping to Sarah, who was walking toward him, her umbrella barely holding up against the wind and rain. She approached slowly, her boots sinking into the wet ground as she made her way to him. "Jake." Sarah's voice was barely audible over the storm, but Jake could hear the concern in it. She was always the pragmatic one, the level-headed person who could keep her cool when things got rough. She had been his friend for years, someone who understood him without needing to speak too much. Her pale blonde hair was matted against her face, her clothes drenched from the rain, but she seemed determined to reach Jake. "I'm here, Sarah," Jake said, standing up to meet her. His voice had a quiet urgency, but Sarah could see the look in his eyes. Something was different. Something had changed with the dog. Sarah stopped a few feet away from him, looking at Bruno in the cage. "He's been like that for a while, hasn't he?" she asked quietly, her eyes narrowing with understanding. "I can tell by the way he's acting." "You're making progress, Jake. But," she hesitated, glancing at Bruno with sympathy, "I think there's more to him than just fear." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "I know. I've been trying to get through to him, but tonight, he's different. He's not just scared. He's remembering something." Sarah crossed her arms, her face soft with concern. "I think I can help," she said. She took a step closer to Jake, glancing at the dog with a sad smile. "I know his story. I've known him since I was a kid." Jake's brow furrowed. "You know Bruno." Sarah nodded. "Yeah. He used to be a K9. He was a police dog, just like the ones in your department. But something happened. Something terrible." Jake was taken aback. He had never heard the full story, just rumors. "What happened?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity and concern. Sarah hesitated, her gaze shifting to the rain, as if collecting her thoughts. "His first handler was Officer Ethan Carter. Ethan was a good guy, a really good guy. He and Bruno were inseparable. They were partners. They worked together on drug busts, chasing down suspects. Bruno was more than just a dog. He was like family to Ethan." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "But one night, on a call, something went wrong. Ethan didn't come back. He died in the line of duty. Bruno was there. He saw it happen. And after that, well, no one knew how to help him. He stopped being the dog he was. He became this. Alone, angry, abandoned. Jake felt his heart sink as Sarah spoke. The weight of the story hit him like a ton of bricks. Bruno had been through something so traumatic, something that had completely shattered his trust in humans. Ethan had been more than a partner to Bruno. He had been the dog's family. Losing him had broken the dog in ways no one could fully understand. But the pain didn't just end with Ethan's death. It continued through the years as Bruno was left to fend for himself, isolated and forgotten. "No one ever told me that," Jake muttered, his voice barely audible. "I just thought he was a stray who'd been left behind. I didn't know the truth." Sarah nodded, her face filled with sadness. "It's not something people like to talk about. Bruno was a hero once, and then he became a symbol of what happens when trust is broken." The storm raged on around them, the rain falling harder, the wind picking up. But Jake didn't care about the weather anymore. He was staring at Bruno, finally understanding the depth of the dog's pain. It wasn't just fear of humans. It was the loss of everything he had ever known, the loss of his purpose, his partner, his family. Jake looked at Sarah. "I think I can help him," he said, more to himself than to her. "I don't know how yet, but I will." Sarah smiled faintly. "I know you will, but it's going to take time. He won't trust you right away. But if you're patient, he'll come around." Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the fence, his hand reaching out toward the dog. Bruno, sensing his movement, lifted his head, his eyes locking with Jake's. There was still wariness in those eyes, but something else, too, something that Jake hadn't seen before. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope. As Jake stood there, watching the storm rage, he felt the weight of his responsibility. This wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about helping a soul heal. It was about offering a second chance to someone who had lost everything. The rain had cleared, but the clouds still lingered, hanging low over the small town of Pine Ridge. The morning was cool, with a crisp breeze sweeping through the trees and rustling the leaves. The air smelled fresh, a welcome change after the storm. Jake Matthews, wrapped in his thick jacket, stood at the edge of the yard where Bruno's kennel was located. It had been weeks since he first approached the German Shepherd, weeks since he had begun to build a fragile bridge of trust between them. It hadn't been easy. Bruno still flinched whenever Jake moved too quickly or came too close. But Jake had noticed something new in the dog's behavior. The tension was slowly melting away, one visit at a time. The previous days had been a series of small victories. Jake had taken things slow, offering Bruno treats, speaking in calm tones, and sitting just far enough away so the dog could make the choice to approach him. Some days Bruno would step closer, sniffing the air as if testing the waters, while other days he would retreat back into the safety of his cage, eyes wide with suspicion. But there had been progress. The harsh growls were becoming less frequent, and the dog's body language was shifting. There was still fear in his eyes, but it wasn't the same kind of wild terror Jake had first seen. Now there was just hesitation, a deep-rooted caution born from years of neglect and pain. Jake wasn't in a rush. He had learned by now that rushing wasn't the answer. Bruno needed time. Trust couldn't be forced. It had to be earned. And that was exactly what Jake was willing to do. This morning, as Jake made his way toward the dog's cage, he noticed something different. Bruno was lying down, not pacing in circles as he usually did, but resting quietly. His ears flicked as Jake approached, and his eyes followed every movement, but there was no aggressive bark, no sharp growl. Just silent observation. Jake crouched down slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. He lowered his body to the ground, sitting with his legs crossed, waiting. The dog didn't flinch. Instead, he just watched. "Hey, buddy," Jake said softly, his voice steady but gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a long moment, there was only silence between them. Jake could feel his heart pounding, but he kept his breathing calm, focusing only on the dog in front of him. Slowly, as if testing the air, Bruno lifted his head slightly. There was still a wariness in his eyes, but something else, too, something that resembled curiosity. It was a small change, but it meant the world to Jake. He wasn't going to rush this. He wasn't going to push Bruno too hard. Instead of moving closer, Jake decided to stay where he was, maintaining his distance but also allowing Bruno to have control over the situation. Jake had learned that control, even the smallest amount, was important to a dog that had been stripped of everything it had known. Bruno had been let down too many times, and Jake was going to do whatever he could to show him that he wasn't just another person who would walk away. "I know you've been through a lot," Jake murmured, "but I'm not going anywhere." A few minutes passed, and then, almost imperceptibly, Bruno began to move. It was a small shift, but Jake noticed it. The dog stood up, cautiously stepping toward the fence, his eyes still trained on Jake. He stopped a few feet away and sat down, his posture stiff, but his gaze softer than it had been before. Jake held his breath, not daring to move, but watching intently. Bruno stayed where he was, watching Jake, but not retreating. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. For the first time, Bruno had made the choice to be a little closer, to trust just a little bit more. Jake sat there for a while longer, enjoying the quiet of the morning. The only sounds were the distant calls of birds and the rustling of leaves in the wind. After a while, he stood up, his body stiff from sitting for so long. He looked at Bruno one last time, then turned and walked toward his car. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew that with each day, Bruno was making progress. Later that afternoon, Sarah came by to check on them. She had become a regular visitor, offering Jake advice and encouragement whenever he needed it. Jake had always appreciated Sarah's grounded nature. She was practical and no-nonsense, but also kind-hearted and deeply understanding. It was easy to talk to her, and over the past few weeks they had spent more time together, reconnecting over shared memories and experiences. Jake had always admired Sarah's dedication to animals, and now, as she stood beside him, offering him advice on how to approach Bruno, he couldn't help but feel grateful for her support. "You're doing great with him," Sarah said, glancing at Bruno. "I can see it in his eyes. He's not as fearful as he was when you first started." Jake smiled, wiping the rain from his face. "I think we're making progress. But it's slow. Some days it feels like we're not getting anywhere." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a reassuring squeeze. "That's how it goes with animals like Bruno. They've been hurt, and it takes time for them to trust again. But you're doing the right thing. Keep going, he'll come around." Jake nodded, taking a deep breath. "I hope so. I just want him to be okay again." "You're giving him that chance," Sarah said. "That's all you can do. And honestly, I think he's starting to trust you. It's not just the treats or the walks, it's you. You've been patient with him. That's what he needs." Jake glanced at Bruno, who was now lying down again, his eyes following their movements but not growling. It was a small change, but Jake could feel the shift. Bruno was learning to trust him, and that was all that mattered for now. As the evening approached, Jake decided it was time to take the next step. He knew Bruno wasn't ready to go on long walks just yet, but he wanted to introduce him to the world outside of the yard. He wasn't going to force the dog, but he could offer him the chance to explore at his own pace. "Let's go for a little walk, huh?" Jake murmured as he opened the gate to the yard. "You don't have to go far, but I think you'll like it." Bruno raised his head, his ears perked up at the sound of Jake's voice. He didn't get up immediately, but he watched Jake, eyes filled with uncertainty. Jake gave him a few moments, just waiting for the dog to make up his mind. And then, slowly, Bruno stood up. He stretched, his body tense but willing, and took a cautious step toward Jake. The bond between them was still fragile, but it was there. Bruno was willing to take the first step, and that meant the world to Jake. The sun was high in the sky, its warm rays filtering through the trees that lined the quiet park where Jake Matthews had brought Bruno. It was a beautiful spring day in Pine Ridge, the kind of day where the air felt fresh and the whole town seemed to be waking up from the quiet of winter. The park was just a short drive from the house where Jake had been working with Bruno, and he thought it would be the perfect place to take the next step in helping the dog. After weeks of gradual trust building, he was ready to see how Bruno would react to the world outside of the backyard. Jake had been taking small steps with Bruno, introducing him to new sights, sounds, and experiences. Each time, the dog had reacted with caution, but also with curiosity. It was as if Bruno had forgotten what it meant to be a dog in the world. Now, Jake was about to show him. The park was peaceful, with families strolling along the walking paths and children playing on the swings. Jake smiled as he looked at Bruno, who was walking alongside him on a leash. The dog's posture was still stiff, but there was no growling, no pulling at the leash. Instead, Bruno was walking calmly, staying close to Jake, his eyes scanning the environment, his senses alert. Jake could feel a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This was the dog he had been trying to reach. This was the dog who had once been so full of fear and aggression, now walking beside him like a loyal companion. "You're doing good, buddy," Jake muttered under his breath, his hand resting lightly on Bruno's back. Bruno's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, but he didn't pull away. For the first time, it felt like they were truly a team, working together to navigate the world. As they walked, Jake kept a watchful eye on Bruno, noting the dog's reactions to the different sounds around them. A child's laugh, the distant bark of another dog, the rustle of leaves. All of it was new to Bruno, and Jake knew that the dog was processing everything at once. It wasn't easy, but he was doing it. He was adapting. They made their way toward the open field at the center of the park, where several people were gathered. Some were sitting on benches, others were walking their dogs, and a few joggers passed by, lost in their own worlds. Bruno's ears perked up at the sound of the joggers' feet hitting the pavement, and his head turned instinctively, watching them pass. Jake noticed the slight twitch in Bruno's muscles, the tension in his body as he observed the people around him. Bruno's eyes darted to every movement, every sound, as if he were on high alert. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, sensing the dog's growing unease. They were getting closer to the group of people now, and Jake could feel the tension in the air. Bruno was still trying to figure out how to react. He had been isolated for so long, and the presence of strangers made him uncomfortable. Jake could feel Bruno's hesitation. The dog wanted to stay close to him, but the presence of others was testing the limits of his newfound trust. Jake stopped walking, allowing Bruno a moment to process. The last thing he wanted was for Bruno to feel cornered. "It's okay," Jake reassured the dog, his voice soft and steady. "We're just going to take it slow. No need to rush." But it wasn't just Bruno who needed to adjust. Jake had to navigate the situation carefully. As they approached the group, one of the people in the park, a man walking his golden retriever, noticed them. The dog barked happily, wagging its tail as it ran toward them. The man smiled, calling out to Jake, "Hey there! What a beautiful dog you've got." Jake smiled back, but his eyes were still on Bruno. He could feel the dog's anxiety rising, the tension tightening in Bruno's shoulders. The man's dog, a friendly, excitable golden retriever, bounded over to Bruno, tail wagging. Bruno immediately froze. His body went rigid, his eyes locking on to the approaching dog. The smile on Jake's face faltered. He had been hoping for a smooth interaction, but it was clear that Bruno was not ready to meet another dog just yet. The golden retriever, oblivious to Bruno's fear, approached too quickly, tail wagging in an attempt to be friendly. Bruno growled low in his throat, stepping back and pulling the leash slightly as he tried to distance himself. The man with the golden retriever frowned and took a step back, sensing Bruno's discomfort. "Sorry about that," he said, giving Jake an apologetic look. "I didn't realize he'd be so reactive." Jake nodded, his expression calm but serious. "It's okay. He's just not used to being around other dogs yet. He's still adjusting." The golden retriever's owner nodded, understanding. "I get it. No harm done." He smiled again, giving Jake a thumbs up before leading his dog away. Jake looked down at Bruno, who was now standing still, watching the man and his dog leave the park. The tension in Bruno's body hadn't completely faded, but Jake could see that the dog wasn't as fearful as he had been before. It was a small step, but it was progress. "That wasn't so bad, huh?" Jake said quietly to Bruno. "We're doing good, you and me." Bruno's ears perked up at Jake's voice and he gave a soft huff, his eyes still scanning the area. Jake kept walking, slowly, allowing Bruno to take the lead. It was all about giving the dog control, letting him choose when he felt safe to approach new situations. As they continued their walk, Jake noticed a familiar face in the distance. It was Lucas, an old friend and fellow officer who had recently returned to Pine Ridge after a few years away. Jake had always respected Lucas, but there was a part of him that had always felt a little distant from him. Lucas was a by-the-book kind of guy, someone who preferred structure and order over anything else. He was the type to follow the rules without question, and while that had made him a good officer, it also made him hard to get to know on a personal level. Lucas spotted Jake and waved, his tall frame cutting through the crowd as he approached. He was dressed in his uniform, his boots clicking against the pavement with each step. As he came closer, Jake could see the skepticism in Lucas's eyes as he glanced down at Bruno. "Hey, Jake," Lucas greeted him, his voice casual but with an edge of uncertainty. "I didn't know you were working with that dog. I've heard the stories." Jake smiled, trying to keep the mood light. "Yeah, I'm trying to help him out." Lucas gave a short nod, eyeing Bruno warily. "You sure that's a good idea? That dog's been through a lot, man. I've heard he's unpredictable. I'd hate to see him hurt someone." Jake's smile faded slightly as he looked at his old friend. "He's not a threat, Lucas. He's just been through some stuff. He's not the way people think he is." Lucas shook his head, his expression skeptical. "I'm just saying, you're taking a risk. We don't know what's going on in that dog's head. He's a loose cannon waiting to happen." Jake stood his ground. "I get that you're concerned, but I'm not giving up on him. He deserves a chance." Lucas seemed to study Jake for a moment, his eyes narrowing. After a pause, he sighed and ran a hand through his short, dark hair. "All right, man. Just be careful. You're on your own with that one." He gave a tight-lipped smile before turning and walking away, his footsteps echoing as he disappeared into the crowd. Jake watched him go, a mixture of frustration and determination flooding him. He understood Lucas's concern. He'd heard the rumors about Bruno, too. But he knew the dog. He had seen the change in Bruno, the glimmer of hope in his eyes that suggested he was more than just a ticking time bomb. It was just going to take time. He turned to look at Bruno, who was still walking beside him, his posture a little more relaxed now. "Don't worry, buddy," Jake said quietly. "We've got this." The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the quiet streets of Pine Ridge. It was the kind of evening where the air felt thick with anticipation, as though something was about to change. Jake Matthews and Bruno walked side by side down the familiar road, Jake's steps steady and measured, Bruno's leash held loosely in Jake's hand. For the first time since they began their journey together, Jake felt like he could relax a little. Bruno had come a long way from the wary, aggressive dog he had first encountered. He was now walking confidently by Jake's side, alert but not frantic, his eyes scanning the environment as if checking for danger, but not for a fight. There was peace between them now, a quiet understanding that had been built over weeks of patience and care. Bruno was learning what it meant to trust again, and Jake was learning how to be a steady, unshakable presence for the dog. They passed the park where Jake had first brought Bruno, the place where the dog had first felt the world beyond the yard. The park was quiet now, save for the soft rustling of the trees and the chirping of crickets. The streets around the park were calm, the distant hum of a few cars drifting through the cool evening air. It was peaceful, but Jake knew that peace could be fleeting in this line of work. Being a cop wasn't about being in the right place at the right time. It was about staying alert, always ready for the unexpected. And that's when it happened. The sound of heavy footsteps behind them broke the tranquility. At first, Jake thought it was just another pedestrian walking by, but then he heard the distinct click of a shoe on the pavement, faster, heavier. Too fast, too deliberate. Jake's instincts kicked in before his brain could fully process what was happening. He turned slightly to glance behind him, his hand instinctively tightening around Bruno's leash. His eyes caught sight of a man emerging from the alleyway at the end of the street. The man was tall, wearing a dark hoodie that covered most of his face, but Jake could make out the flash of a knife in his hand. The man was moving fast, and before Jake could react, he was charging straight at him. Bruno, sensing the danger before Jake could even make a move, immediately went on high alert. The dog's posture shifted, and the fur on his back bristled. Jake barely had time to shout, "Stay back!" before the man lunged toward him. It happened in an instant. Bruno sprang into action. The dog, with the instinct of a former K9, moved with lightning speed, tackling the assailant to the ground with the precision of a trained fighter. The man let out a strangled gasp as Bruno's teeth sank into his arm, the knife falling from his hand and clattering against the pavement. Bruno held him down, his powerful body pinning the man to the ground as Jake rushed to grab the knife and throw it aside. The thug struggled beneath Bruno, but there was no way he could overpower the dog. "Get off of me!" the man shouted, struggling to break free, but Bruno didn't budge. The dog's jaws remained clamped firmly on the man's arm, and his body was tense, ready to defend Jake at all costs. The growl that rumbled from Bruno's throat was low and threatening, warning the man that this was not a fight he was going to win. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest, but his training kicked in. He quickly reached for his radio, calling for backup. "Suspect down at the corner of Elm and Maple. I need backup immediately." His voice was calm, but there was a slight edge to it. He didn't want to take any chances. The man continued to struggle beneath Bruno, but there was no escaping the dog's grip. "Let go of me!" The man spat, trying to push Bruno off with his other hand, but the dog's hold was firm. Bruno wasn't just protecting Jake. He was stopping the threat, doing exactly what he had been trained to do. Within moments, sirens could be heard in the distance, and backup arrived. Several officers rushed to the scene, securing the area and quickly taking the man into custody. Bruno, his job done, released the man's arm and stepped back, standing next to Jake like a proud warrior. His body was still tense, alert, but he was calm, waiting for Jake's next move. The two of them, in that moment, were team partners who had fought together in the face of danger. Jake knelt down to Bruno, his hands gently stroking the dog's head. "Good boy," Jake said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "You did great." Bruno wagged his tail, the tension in his body easing slightly as he looked up at Jake with those intelligent, soulful eyes. It was clear that the dog knew what had just happened. He had protected Jake. He had protected his friend. As the officers took the suspect away, Lucas appeared from behind the crowd, having arrived just after the backup. He had been on a nearby patrol and had heard the radio call. As he walked over to Jake, he couldn't hide the look of astonishment on his face. His eyes darted between Jake and Bruno, and there was a long pause before he spoke. I didn't think he had it in him," Lucas said, his voice low, as though still processing what had just happened. His dark eyes flicked to Bruno, and for the first time, Jake saw the hint of respect in Lucas's gaze. Jake raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "What do you mean?" Lucas ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head slightly. "I didn't think the dog had changed. I thought he was just a liability. But that—" He looked at Bruno, who was standing quietly beside Jake, his gaze watchful. "That was impressive. I've never seen anything like it." He was in control. He knew exactly what to do. Jake nodded, his expression serious but proud. "I told you, he's not a threat. He's a good dog. He just needed someone to trust him." Lucas gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "I was wrong about him, Jake. I should have trusted your judgment." "I'm sorry." Jake looked at Lucas, a sense of gratitude filling him. It wasn't often that Lucas admitted he was wrong, and the fact that he had just done so meant something. It meant that people were starting to see Bruno for what he really was. Not a threat, but a loyal companion who was capable of more than anyone had given him credit for. "It's all right," Jake said, his voice softening. "It's not just about Bruno. It's about giving everyone a chance, even when they've been written off." Lucas nodded, still looking at Bruno. You're right. Maybe it's time I started giving more people more dogs a chance." As the evening drew to a close, Jake stood by Bruno, the two of them watching the sun set over the quiet streets of Pine Ridge. It had been a day of tests of fears faced and conquered. And while Jake knew there would be more challenges ahead, he also knew that Bruno was ready. They had each other's backs now. And that was all that mattered. The morning after the incident with the would-be attacker, the entire town of Pine Ridge seemed to be abuzz with talk. Jake Matthews had never been one for public accolades, but he could feel the shift in the air. Bruno, the dog who had once been feared and abandoned, had now become a hero in the eyes of the community. His quick thinking and protective instincts had saved Jake's life. And now, the people who had once avoided him, the ones who had called him a danger to the community, were beginning to see Bruno for what he truly was: a loyal companion, a protector, a friend. Jake had made the decision to hold a small community meeting, inviting the townspeople to gather at the local town hall. It wasn't anything grand, but it was a step toward making things right for Bruno. He wanted the people of Pine Ridge to understand that Bruno was no longer a threat. He was not the dog of the past, the aggressive animal that had once been left to rot behind a fence. He was a hero, an essential part of the team, someone they could trust. As Jake stood in front of the crowd, he felt a sense of pride in his chest. He had been through so much with Bruno. They had both come a long way from the first day Jake had laid eyes on the dog, and now it was time for everyone else to see the change too. "Thank you all for coming," Jake began, his voice steady but full of emotion. The room was filled with familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and people who had lived in Pine Ridge for years. "I'm sure most of you know why we're here today. We're here to recognize an incredible animal, someone who has proven himself to be much more than anyone thought he was." There were a few nods and murmurs in the crowd, but most eyes were on Jake, waiting for him to continue. Bruno, standing beside him on a leash, sat calmly on the floor, his alert eyes scanning the room. The dog was still wary of strangers, but he had come so far in his recovery. His stance was relaxed, his ears no longer flattened against his head in fear, and his gaze wasn't full of suspicion. He was starting to trust the people around him. And for that, Jake was incredibly proud. Jake turned slightly to look at Bruno, who, despite the room full of people, seemed calm. He smiled, giving the dog a gentle pat on the head. "This is Bruno," Jake said, his voice carrying through the room. "A few weeks ago, you might have called him a threat. You might have thought he was dangerous. I know I did, but now I see something different. I see a dog who gave everything to protect me. I see a dog who deserves a second chance, just like any of us." There were a few soft gasps from the crowd, and Jake could see the initial skepticism in some of their eyes beginning to soften. It wasn't easy for them to let go of their fears, but Jake was determined to help them see the truth. Bruno's eyes locked onto Jake's, and for a moment it was just the two of them in the room. The bond they had built over the past few weeks was undeniable. Bruno wasn't just a dog, he was family. Jake wasn't about to let that go. Bruno didn't ask for the life he had. He didn't ask for the pain, the abandonment, or the fear. But he's here now, and he's showing us that he's more than capable of being a loyal companion. A hero, even. There was a silence that hung in the air, thick with the weight of Jake's words. And then, slowly, one by one, people began to clap. It started with Sarah, who was standing near the back of the room, her eyes soft with pride. She had been by Jake's side every step of the way, offering advice, support, and encouragement. Now, seeing the recognition Bruno was receiving, she felt a swell of happiness for both Jake and the dog. "Bruno, you've earned this," Jake said as he reached for a small plaque from the table beside him. He turned to the dog, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "This is your reward, buddy. You're not just a dog anymore. You're a partner, a hero, and a part of this community." With that, Jake handed the plaque to Bruno, who accepted it with a gentle paw, his eyes shining with something that resembled pride. It was a simple gesture, but it was one that meant the world to both of them. As the room filled with applause, Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. It wasn't just about the plaque or the public recognition. It was about the change in perception. It was about the people of Pine Ridge seeing Bruno as more than just a dangerous animal. They were beginning to understand that Bruno was a victim of circumstance, just like so many others. And now he was a part of their community. After the meeting, people came up to Jake and Bruno, shaking his hand and offering congratulations. Some even patted Bruno's head, whispering kind words to him. It was a far cry from the fear and suspicion that had marked the dog's arrival in the town. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Jake found himself standing outside the town hall, Sarah beside him. The warm evening air felt good after the tension of the meeting. They both stood in silence for a moment, watching the last of the townspeople trickle out of the building. "You did it, Jake," Sarah said softly, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "You've made them see the truth. Bruno's no longer a threat. He's one of us." Jake looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Sarah. You've been with me from the start. I wouldn't have made it this far without your support." She smiled at him, a soft, knowing smile. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just glad to see you and Bruno getting the recognition you deserve." She paused, her gaze shifting to the dog, who was sitting by their feet, tail wagging slowly. "He's come a long way." Jake nodded, his gaze softening as he looked down at Bruno. "Yeah, we both have." Sarah leaned in slightly, her voice quieter now. "You know, you've done something incredible here. You've helped Bruno, but you've also shown the people of Pine Ridge what it means to give someone, or something, a second chance. That's not something most people would do." Jake felt a warmth spread through him. He had always admired Sarah's wisdom, her ability to see things clearly, even when others couldn't. "Thanks, Sarah," he said quietly. "I think I've learned a lot from him. And from you." Sarah's smile widened and she reached out to give his arm a gentle squeeze. "You've always had it in you, Jake. You just needed the right partner." Jake chuckled softly, looking down at Bruno. "I think I've found him." As the night wore on, Jake and Sarah walked through the town, side by side with Bruno trailing happily behind them. The quiet streets of Pine Ridge felt different now. There was a sense of peace in the air, a sense of belonging. And for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was truly home. The small town of Pine Ridge had been forever changed. It had been several months since the incident that marked the turning point in the relationship between Jake Matthews and his loyal companion, Bruno. The town that had once feared the German Shepherd now embraced him as one of their own, and the bond between Jake and Bruno had only deepened over time. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Bruno now stopped to pat his head, their smiles genuine and welcoming. The fear that had once clung to Bruno like a shadow had dissipated, replaced by admiration and respect. Jake and Bruno had grown together in ways neither had expected. It was no longer just about the job, it was about the connection they shared. The trust that had taken weeks to build had become a solid foundation that Jake knew would never break. Bruno had found a place to belong, and in doing so he had helped Jake find something he had been missing for years, a sense of home, a family. It was a Saturday afternoon when the town gathered to celebrate the annual Pine Ridge Festival, an event that brought everyone together for a day of music, food, and community spirit. Jake stood at the edge of the festival grounds watching as families walked past, enjoying the festivities. His heart swelled with pride as he watched Bruno happily greet people, his tail wagging as children ran up to him asking to pet the dog. Bruno had become a symbol of loyalty, trust, and redemption in Pine Ridge, and everyone in the town knew it. Jake glanced over at Sarah, who was standing beside him, her hand resting comfortably in his. Sarah had always been a steady presence in his life, but over the past few months their connection had grown into something more. Sarah had become more than just a friend to Jake, she had become his partner in every sense of the word. She had supported him through the trials and tribulations with Bruno, and in doing so, she had shown him what it meant to be truly loved and understood. Sarah was a striking woman, with her tall, slender frame and sharp features that seemed to be softened by her gentle smile. Her blonde hair was always neatly tied back, and she wore a simple yet elegant outfit that matched her calm and collected personality. She had a way of making everyone feel at ease, and Jake was no exception. He couldn't help but smile whenever she was near, and he knew that she had been a pivotal part of his journey, both with Bruno and with his own growth as a person. Over the months, Jake had come to realize just how much Sarah meant to him. She was more than just a friend or someone to share the quiet moments with. She was his anchor, the one who had been there when the storm raged and when the calm finally came. He had never imagined that he would find someone like Sarah in Pine Ridge, but here she was, standing beside him, just as they had once dreamed about when they were younger. "You're quiet today," Sarah said, her voice warm, bringing Jake out of his thoughts. She glanced up at him, her blue eyes shining with the same warmth that had always drawn him to her. "Everything okay?" Jake nodded, giving her a soft smile. "Yeah. Just thinking about how far we've come. How far you've come, too." He looked over at Bruno, who was happily rolling around in the grass with a group of children. "And how far he's come." Sarah followed Jake's gaze, her eyes softening as she watched the dog play. "He's come a long way. We all have." She turned back to Jake, her smile growing. "And I'm glad I'm here with you, Jake. I've never been happier." Jake's heart swelled at her words, and he couldn't help but pull her into a brief hug. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, he realized that this was what he had been searching for all along. It wasn't just about Bruno finding a home or a place to belong, it was about Jake finding his own place in the world. And now, with Sarah by his side, he felt whole. Later that afternoon, as the festival began to wind down, the town gathered at the town hall for the annual award ceremony. It was a tradition to honor those who had made a significant impact on the community, and this year Jake and Bruno were to be recognized for their work together. Bruno, once feared by the town, was now being celebrated as a hero, a dog who had proven that loyalty, trust, and love could conquer even the darkest of pasts. Jake stood at the front of the room, the town's mayor beside him. The mayor, a tall man with a firm handshake and a kind smile, addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to honor a dog who has shown us all what it means to be loyal, brave, and true. Bruno, the dog who has protected us all, has proven that sometimes the most unexpected heroes come from the places we least expect." The room erupted in applause, and Jake felt a lump form in his throat. Bruno was standing beside him, his head held high, his tail wagging as the crowd cheered. The dog who had once been labeled dangerous and unpredictable was now a symbol of everything good in Pine Ridge. He had found his place in the world, and so had Jake. The mayor handed Jake a small plaque, a token of appreciation for his and Bruno's service to the community. "Jake, you've shown us what it means to trust in someone or something when no one else will. And Bruno, you've shown us all that redemption is possible, no matter what your past may be." Jake looked at the plaque, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't just about me or Bruno. This is about everyone in Pine Ridge who believed in us when we needed it the most. Without the support of this community, none of this would have been possible." As Jake spoke, he could feel Sarah's hand on his arm, steady and reassuring. He knew that she was just as proud as he was, that she had been with him through every step of this journey. And now, with Bruno by his side and the community finally accepting him for who he truly was, Jake felt like he had found his place in the world. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued and the town settled back into its familiar rhythm, Jake, Sarah, and Bruno walked home together. The night was peaceful, the stars above them twinkling like tiny lights in the vast sky. Jake felt a sense of contentment wash over him. He had made it. He had found his purpose, his family, and his home. As they reached Jake's small house on the edge of town, he looked down at Bruno, who was walking beside him, his head held high and his eyes full of trust. Bruno had come so far, and so had Jake. Together they had built a family that had started with a broken dog and a man who had lost his way, but now was whole again. "I think we're ready for whatever comes next," Jake said softly, looking at Sarah and then at Bruno. Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting the same sense of peace that Jake felt. "We've got this, Jake. We've got each other." And for the first time in a long time, Jake knew that everything was exactly as it was meant to be. The story of Jake and Bruno is not just about a man and a dog. It is a powerful reminder of the miracles that can happen when we offer second chances, when we choose compassion over fear, and when we believe in the goodness that can emerge from even the most broken of souls. Like Bruno, we all have our scars, our moments of doubt, and our fears. But with patience, love, and faith, we can heal, grow, and become something greater than we ever thought possible. There is a miracle in every act of kindness. In every moment we choose to believe in someone else, even when the world has written them off. Just as Bruno found redemption and a new purpose, we too can find our way through the storms of life with a little faith and a lot of love. As Jake showed us, the greatest strength lies in showing up for each other, in not turning away when things seem too hard. In our daily lives we face challenges, but we also face opportunities to be kind, to be patient, and to open our hearts to those in need. Just like Jake did for Bruno, we can choose to believe in the best of others and help them discover their strength. It's a reminder that no matter where we've come from or how broken we feel, we are never beyond redemption. If this story has touched your heart, please share it with others. Leave a comment below and let us know what you think. Let us know if you believe in the power of second chances and the miracles that happen when we choose love. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories. May God bless you all, and may you always have the faith to believe in miracles. If you agree, type Amen in the comments below.